Welcome to the audio edition of Musical Midrash, where theology meets the theater and the stories we sing become the sacred texts we live. I'm Dustin Wilzer, and this is a reading of my latest reflection from Substack. Whether you're tuning in from the pew, the pit, or the passenger seat, I'm glad you're here. Where two or more are gathered, there's blocking. How musical theater taught me to worship with my whole self, body, breath, story, and song. By Dustin Wilzer. A couple years ago, I was getting ready to see The Griswolds' Broadway Vacation, a quirky, ill-fated pre-Broadway musical based on the National Lampoon characters. The show didn't last long, but something that happened before the show stuck with me far longer than any tune from the score. The day before the performance, I got one of those standard pre-show emails from the theater. It included directions, curtain time, COVID protocols, the usual. But right at the end, there was a line I didn't expect. It said, "Everyone must engage for the performance to succeed." That wasn't just etiquette, that was liturgy. I've thought about that line more times than I can count. Not because it was particularly clever, but because it was absolutely true. Not just about theater, about worship, about church, about the sacred work we do when we gather with intention and vulnerability. Everyone must engage. Not everyone must agree, not everyone must impress, but everyone must engage. Because the power of the moment depends on what we bring to it. And yet, that word, performance, tends to make people nervous, especially in church. When I say that worship is a kind of performance, I can see the discomfort rise. Theological red flags start waving. The word performance can feel loaded, as if to say that someone is pretending, as if performance means fake or manipulative or showy. But I don't think performance is the problem. I think we've just forgotten what it actually means. Because when I say that worship is a kind of performance, I don't mean it's a spectacle. I mean it's a call to show up with our whole selves. It's a call to presence. It's a call to truth. And when we do it well, together, something holy happens. Let's name the tension plainly. In many church circles, performance is a dirty word. It's not unusual to hear things like, "We don't want a performance, we want authenticity." Worship isn't about entertainment. It's not a show, it's sacred. And to be fair, those concerns aren't coming out of nowhere. They're often responses to real wounds. We've all seen what happens when worship becomes ego-driven, when the lights, the language, or the leadership start to feel more like a brand launch than a blessing. When the sermon becomes a TED Talk, when the music feels like a concert, when questioning is discouraged because the story's too pretty to interrupt. Theologian Marva J. Dawn cautioned against what we call entertainment-based worship, warning that it risks turning congregants into passive spectators instead of active participants in God's presence. She wasn't wrong. Worship should never be reduced to a consumer experience, a place where people show up to get something and leave without ever being changed. But here's the thing. Performance isn't the enemy of authenticity. Disconnection is. When worship becomes hollow, when we go through the motions with no intention, no vulnerability, no connection, that's when we've lost the plot. And disconnection doesn't only happen when things are flashy or well-produced. It happens just as easily in traditions that pride themselves on being unpolished or real. It happens in mumbling liturgy, in joyless sermons, in exhausted prayers. The problem isn't that worship involves performance. It's that we've misunderstood what performance really is. Performance doesn't mean pretending. Performance, at its best, means presence. It means giving yourself over to the moment with attention, integrity, and care. Think about a wedding vow, a eulogy, a lullaby sung at bedtime. These are all performances, and they're some of the most sincere acts we ever offer. Worship is no different. It, too, is a form of embodied expression. It's not about putting on a show. It's about offering yourself for something bigger. And that, I would argue, is a sacred thing. We've been taught to associate performance with pretense, as if to perform is to fake it. But that's not what performance means at all. At its core, performance is simply embodied, intentional presence offered for the sake of others. A good performance isn't about impressing, it's about expressing. It's about taking something internal, an idea, a truth, a conviction, and offering it outward, honestly and generously, in a form that others can receive. That's not manipulation, that's ministry. Performance, when done well, is not a mask, it's a mirror. Ask any actor who's ever lost themselves in a role, or any preacher who's ever felt the words arrive mid-sentence, or any singer who's ever forgotten they had a microphone because the Spirit carried the note. They'll tell you, the most powerful moments don't happen when we try to control the outcome. They happen when we show up, open-hearted and open-bodied, and trust that something sacred will happen between us. Performance, then, is a form of presence, and presence is the soil in which transformation grows. In worship, this looks like a preacher who doesn't just read words off a page, but proclaims them with breath and conviction. A liturgist whose tone and posture help the congregation feel the difference between lament and joy. A communion server who looks each person in the eye and says, "This is the body of Christ broken for you," like they mean it. None of this is fake. None of this is entertainment. But all of it is performed. And here's the theological turn. In performance, we practice incarnation. We take sacred truths, love, grace, mercy, justice, and we give them form. We put them in bodies. We wrap them in rhythm and tone and gesture and voice. We offer them not just as information, but as experience. That's not a distraction from the gospel. That is the gospel. God didn't send a text. God sent a body. And every time we step into a moment with reverence, awareness, and the willingness to give ourselves to something larger, we are participating in that same incarnational impulse. Whether you're in a pulpit, a pew, a theater seat, or a spot center stage, the invitation is the same. Don't just say it. Don't just believe it. Perform it. Live it. Embody it. And in doing so, let it become real for you and for everyone gathered with you. I didn't learn the liturgy of the church in seminary first. I learned it in rehearsal halls. Before I could name the theological arc from gathering to sending, I knew how to hit my mark and take a final bow. Before I studied the shape of the Eucharist, I knew how to surrender to a scene. Before I led congregations in prayer, I knew what it meant to trust an ensemble, to give and receive breath, and to co-create something bigger than myself. Theater taught me how to worship, not just with my voice, but with my presence. Rehearsal, for instance, is one of the most spiritual disciplines I know. You show up tired. You show up nervous. You show up not knowing if it's going to work. But you keep coming back. You try again. You make space for others. You mess up and you keep singing. You practice being present over and over until something begins to take shape. Until the movement feels like muscle memory. Until the words live in your bones. That's spiritual formation. That's liturgical rehearsal. Leading worship is no different. Every Sunday is an act of collective improvisation shaped by structure but carried by spirit. The best leaders aren't just charismatic. They're responsive. They listen. They adjust. They know how to hold silence and when to shift tempo. They know how to shape space, not just fill it. And just like in theater, you're never doing it alone. Worship, like performance, is ensemble work. The preacher, the musician, the reader, the usher, the person lighting the candles, the one rocking a restless child in the back row. All of us contribute to the sacred rhythm. The Spirit doesn't need a soloist. She needs a cast. That's why I'm drawn to Marcia McPhee's work on worship design. In Think Like a Filmmaker, she invites worship leaders to attend to pace, flow, sensory connection, and emotional arc, not as performance gimmicks, but as tools for telling the truth beautifully. Because beauty matters. Because rhythm matters. Because storytelling shapes the soul. In both theater and church, the question isn't, how do we impress them? It's how do we prepare the space so something holy can happen? Theater trained me to think about transitions. How one scene flows into another. How energy builds and releases. How silence can speak louder than words. That training now lives in my liturgical instincts. I don't just plan a service. I choreograph one. Not to manipulate, but to make room for mystery. If worship is a performance, then the congregation is not the audience. They are the cast. This is where so many critiques of performance in worship fall apart. They assume a binary, performer and spectator. But in true liturgy, just like in truly alive theater, that binary collapses. Everyone is essential. Everyone is participating, even when they're not speaking. One of the most sacred dynamics in theater is the energy between performer and audience. It's invisible but palpable. A joke lands because of a laugh. A silence deepens because no one dares to breathe. A performer weeps more honestly because someone in the front row is weeping with them. It's not magic. It's mutuality. That's what worship should feel like. It's not just the person with the microphone who's shaping the moment. It's the gathered body, in breath, in stillness, in voice, in attention, in presence. And that presence is part of the offering. Walter Brueggemann puts it this way: congregational singing not only creates unity in the body, but also offers a particular kind of unity, a shared act of rendering one's whole life before the mystery of God. That is performance in its most sacred form. People showing up to render their lives joyfully, honestly, imperfectly before the holy. If we think the only performers in worship are the ones on the platform, we've missed the point. The gathered congregation is not an audience to be impressed. They are a community called to participate, to sing, to respond, to carry the weight and wonder of the moment together. That's why I love places like Marie's Crisis Cafe, where strangers gather to sing show tunes in community. No script, no leader, no program, just the sacred alchemy of voices rising together around a piano. It's deeply theatrical and it's deeply liturgical. Or think of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, an irreverent, chaotic ritual of call and response, costume and full-bodied participation. It might not be everyone's idea of church, but it understands something many sanctuaries forget. When people are invited to show up fully, they do. And when they do, something holy happens. The congregation isn't the audience. The congregation is the church. And the church, when it gathers with intention and vulnerability, becomes a living performance of grace. When I say worship is performance, I don't mean it's a show. I mean it's an act of presence, an embodied offering, a communal rhythm, a sacred rehearsal of what it means to live in relationship with one another, with the Spirit, with the truth we're trying to tell. Theater gave me the vocabulary for this before church ever did. In theater, we talk about blocking, the intentional movement of bodies through space to tell the story more clearly. In worship, we call it procession or gathering or ritual movement. Either way, it matters. Our bodies preach before we say a word. We talk about pacing, how the tempo of a scene shapes the emotional arc. In liturgy, that's what we do with silence, with transitions, with the swell and settling of song. Speed up the flow too much and it's disorienting. Drag too long and the moment deflates. Rhythm is a kind of pastoral care. We talk about blocking a scene with intentionality. In worship, the arrangement of chairs, the shape of the altar, the way people move through the space, these are all scenographic choices. You can choreograph an encounter with grace, or you can make grace harder to find. And then there's breath, the most underrated, most theological of tools. Every good performer knows the power of breath, how it anchors a line, how it shapes intention, how it synchronizes an ensemble. Worship is no different. The preacher's breath before a pause, the collective inhale before a congregational song, the gasp of recognition when the story hits home. Breath is theology. It is presence. It is spirit. In both Hebrew and Greek, the word for spirit is the same as breath, ruach and pneuma. To lead worship is to attend to breath, your own and the congregation's. To participate in worship is to offer breath, not just to stay alive, but to bring the liturgy to life. This is why worship can never be purely cerebral. It must be performed, in the most sacred sense of the word. Not performed at people, performed with them, and for the sake of something bigger than any one of us alone. When a dancer stretches toward heaven, when a preacher lifts their voice, when a whole room sings as one, these are not theatrics. They are sacrament. They are the Word made flesh, again and again and again. Worship isn't a show, but it is a scene. Not because it's staged, but because it's embodied. Not because it's fake, but because it's felt. And in the most powerful performances, Whether on a stage or in a sanctuary, what's revealed is not the performer, it's the truth. I keep coming back to that line. Everyone must engage for the performance to succeed. It was meant as a pre-show reminder, but it stayed with me as a liturgical truth, a theological compass, a pastoral challenge. Because worship isn't just what happens on the platform, it's what happens between us. The Spirit moves not through a spotlight, but through the shared breath of people who are willing to show up. Heart open, body present, voice ready. Everyone must engage, because that's what makes it sacred. Not polish, not perfection, not charisma. Presence. And yes, that's performance. Worship is a kind of performance, not a show to impress, but an act of holy offering. Not a display of ego, but a rehearsal of grace. Not manipulation, but incarnation. We perform the sacred not because we're pretending. We perform the sacred because we believe it's worth embodying, worth repeating, worth singing in full voice until it becomes real. When I preach, I'm not just giving information, I'm bearing witness. When I serve communion, I'm not just reading a script, I'm holding out grace in my own two hands. When I sing, I'm not trying to impress, I'm trying to pray. And I know I'm not alone. To every preacher who's ever trembled behind the pulpit, to every worship leader who's ever worried that the mic won't catch the Spirit, to every liturgist who's ever wondered if it's too much to gesture, to pause, to lift their voice just so. Let me say this plainly. It's not too much. It's sacred. It's performance in the holiest sense of the word. So go ahead. Rehearse the gospel. Sing the psalms. Preach with your full body. Design worship with rhythm, pacing, beauty, and breath. And trust that what you're doing isn't artifice. It's art. It's grace. It's presence. Because when performance becomes presence, and presence becomes communion, then worship has not lost its way. It has found its heartbeat. May every benediction be a bow. May every bow be a blessing. And may the curtain never fully fall on the sacred drama we're still learning how to play. Theater taught me how to worship. Worship taught me how to return. And both have taught me this story is not over yet. Let the liturgy begin. This has been the Musical Midrash Podcast. This episode was written, narrated, and produced by me, Dustin Wilzer. It was adapted from my Substack post originally posted at dustinwilzer.substack.com. You can find more of my work, including essays, sermons, and sacred storytelling there. Follow me on Blue Sky, TikTok, and YouTube at Dustin Wilzer and join the conversation. If this episode moved you, inspired you, or made you think, share it with a friend, leave a review, or drop me a note. Until next time.